She watched them fall, 60-year-old pines planted by her own hands when she was a young woman carrying the weight of a number on her arm. Ruth is 91. Each tree bore the name of a family member who didn't come home. Then Amanda, the HOA president, deemed the garden visually non-compliant and ordered a bulldozer. When Ruth stepped outside with her watering can, she found a woman in a pink coat standing on fresh stumps, explaining that the community had voted, and the shape of the memorial looked strange from a satellite view. What Amanda didn't know was that one phone call from Ruth's grandson reached a man in Jerusalem who reached a man in Washington. That phone call set in motion a chain of events no one in that quiet suburban HOA could have predicted. Because Ruth's garden wasn't just a few trees, it was a living memorial, one of the last personal Holocaust memorials tended by a survivor herself. And when Amanda reduced it to kindling, she didn't just attack an elderly woman's flower bed. She ignited an international incident that would pull in diplomats, federal agents, and a legal question that had never been tested in an American courtroom. Can a homeowners association bylaw override a memorial to the 6 million? Because this wasn't a question of petunias or property values. This was about whether a woman who survived the camps could be silenced by a clipboard and a set of covenants drafted in a developer's office. To understand how it all unraveled, you have to start with the woman at the center of it. Ruth Friedman, born in Krakow, Poland, 1933. She was 6 years old when the Nazis came. By 12, she had lost both parents, 3 siblings, and every cousin she'd ever known. She survived Auschwitz because a guard decided she looked strong enough to work. The number on her forearm, faded but still legible, was applied with a needle dipped in ink made from shoe polish. She arrived in America in 1951 with nothing. No money, no family, no English. She worked in a textile factory in New Jersey for 37 years, married a fellow survivor, had 2 children, then 6 grandchildren. And when she retired, she moved to a quiet suburb in Bergen County, bought a small house with a half-acre lot, and began to plant trees. 14 trees, one for each member of her immediate family who had been murdered. She planted an elm for her mother, Chana, a maple for her father, Joseph, a birch for her eldest brother, David, who was shot trying to protect their grandmother. She planted until her garden became a sanctuary. For 60 years, she tended that soil. Through the death of her husband, through chemotherapy, through the slow erosion of her own body. The garden was her synagogue, her therapist, her archive. Neighbors knew what it meant. They respected it. Then in 2021, a new homeowner moved into the cul-de-sac. Amanda Townsend, 43, recently divorced, had made a small fortune flipping condos in Florida. She brought with her a white Mercedes, a Pomeranian, and an ambition to clean up what she called the neighborhood's aesthetic drift. Within 6 months, Amanda had gotten herself elected president of the Ridgemont Estates Homeowners Association. Her platform was simple: restore property values through strict enforcement of every covenant, every bylaw, every obscure design guideline that had been ignored for decades. Most homeowners grumbled but complied. But Amanda's campaign ran straight into Ruth's garden. Because the covenant stated that all front yard landscaping must maintain a symmetrical layout and consist of approved species, Ruth's trees didn't match. They were irregular, planted in a pattern that, from above, formed the shape of a Star of David. Amanda sent the first letter in October. Please replace non-compliant trees with approved shrubs within 30 days. Ruth, whose English was still accented but precise, walked over to Amanda's house and explained what the trees represented. Amanda listened. Then she said, "I'm sorry for your loss, but rules are rules. I'll be happy to help you pick out replacement plants." The letters continued. Fines accumulated. The HOA board, composed mostly of Amanda's allies, voted 3-1 to demand removal. Ruth's grandson, Michael, a law student at Columbia, offered to fight it. But Ruth, tired and weary of conflict, told him to let it go. She would appeal to the board personally. She would make them see. Meeting was scheduled for March 15th. Ruth baked rugelach. She wore her best cardigan. She brought photographs of her family, the only ones she had left, yellowed and cracked. She stood before the board and spoke for 12 minutes about the Holocaust, about memory, about what those trees meant. When she finished, Amanda looked at her notes and said, "The board appreciates your testimony. However, the visual non-compliance remains." Per our bylaws, we've scheduled removal for April 3rd. You may plant replacement saplings at your own expense after that date. Michael, sitting in the back row, stood up. You're bulldozing a Holocaust memorial, he said. Amanda didn't blink. We're enforcing community standards. What happened next is the reason you're watching this video. Because Michael didn't just file an appeal. He called a friend whose father worked at the Israeli consulate in New York. That friend made a call. The consul called an ambassador. The ambassador called someone in the office of the Israeli Prime Minister. And within 72 hours, a secure fax arrived at the FBI field office in Newark. It contained a single question. Is the United States government aware that a local housing authority is destroying a Holocaust survivor's property in violation of federal hate crime statutes and bilateral preservation agreements with the State of Israel? The next morning, 2 agents in Navy windbreakers pulled up to Ridgemont Estates. Special Agent David Leibovitz was the first one out of the car. His partner, Agent Maria Vasquez, followed, scanning the quiet cul-de-sac with the kind of trained caution usually reserved for drug raids, not suburban HOA disputes. But this wasn't just any HOA dispute. Leibovitz carried a file stamped with the insignia of the FBI's Civil Rights Division and a cover sheet that read, "Referred by the Office of the Israeli Prime Minister, Priority." Ruth met them at the door. She was wearing a housecoat, her silver hair pinned up, the faded tattoo visible on her left forearm. She offered them coffee. They accepted, and for the next 40 minutes she told them everything. The years in the camp, the family she'd lost, the trees she'd planted, one by one, each root ball cradling a handful of soil from her garden in Krakow, smuggled out decades earlier by a cousin who'd survived the ghetto. She showed them the photographs, the letters, the certificate from Yad Vashem recognizing her garden as a living testimony site, a designation granted to fewer than 80 private memorials worldwide. Leibovitz took notes. His own grandmother had survived Treblinka. The number on Ruth's arm, he noticed, was only 5 digits away from his grandmother's. He didn't mention it, not yet. When they left Ruth's house, they didn't go to Amanda's. They went to the county records office first. What they found shifted the entire case from a property dispute to something far more serious. The Ridgemont Estates HOA, incorporated in 1997, had been quietly acquiring small parcels of adjacent land through an obscure legal mechanism called abandoned lot reversion. But here's the thing. Ruth's half-acre was not abandoned, and the HOA had never filed the required public notices. Worse, the title search revealed that the original developer had designated Ruth's entire block as a historical preservation easement in 1972, a fact that had somehow been omitted from every subsequent HOA disclosure. Leibovitz called the Bureau's legal attaché in Washington. The conversation lasted 18 minutes. When he hung up, he turned to Vasquez. This isn't just a hate crime. This is wire fraud, conspiracy to commit theft through fraudulent HOA governance, and violation of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's preservation protocols, which the U.S. ratified in 2019. They drove straight to Amanda Townsend's house. She answered the door in a designer athleisure set, a glass of Chardonnay in her hand despite it being 11 in the morning. The Pomeranian yapped at their heels. "Mrs. Townsend, I'm Special Agent Leibovitz, FBI." "This is Special Agent Vasquez. May we come in?" Amanda's face cycled through surprise, indignation, and then a practiced calm. "I've already spoken with our attorney. This is an HOA internal matter. You have no jurisdiction." Vasquez stepped forward. "Ma'am, we have specific federal jurisdiction under the Matthew Shepard and James Byard Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, 18 U.S. Code Section 249, as well as the bilateral preservation agreement between the United States and the State of Israel, signed 2020. If Ruth Friedman's memorial has been knowingly targeted for destruction based on its religious or ethnic character, that's a federal felony. You can speak with us now, or we can escort you to the Newark field office." Amanda's mouth tightened. She set the wine glass down. "Fine, come in." For the next hour, Leibovitz and Vasquez questioned her. She insisted the removal was purely aesthetic, that she had no idea the garden was a Holocaust memorial, that the Star of David pattern was probably a coincidence, and that she was merely enforcing bylaws designed to protect property values. She claimed the board vote was unanimous and fully legal, but Vasquez had already pulled the HOA's internal communications. A subpoena wasn't even necessary. One of the board members, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret Chen, had been horrified by the vote and had quietly emailed a cache of documents to the FBI tip line the night before. Those documents revealed a chain of emails between Amanda and a real estate developer named Sterling Properties. In one dated 8 months earlier, Amanda wrote, "The Friedman property is the linchpin. If we can get her out, the whole block can be rezoned for multi-unit. I'll handle the HOA side. You just get the permits ready." Amanda wasn't enforcing community standards. She was running a calculated displacement campaign, targeting elderly homeowners whose lots had been undervalued due to their age and limited mobility. Ruth's memorial garden wasn't an aesthetic problem. It was an obstacle to a $40 million development deal. Confronted with the emails, Amanda fell silent. Then she said 4 words that sealed her fate. "I want my lawyer." The agents left, but not before informing her that all tree removal activities were to cease immediately pending a federal review. Amanda nodded. She said she understood. She said she would comply. She lied. The emergency board meeting was convened by text message at 3:17 that afternoon. Amanda didn't mention the FBI visit. Instead, she claimed that an inspection had found Ruth's trees infested with emerald ash borer, an invasive beetle that posed an imminent threat to the entire township's canopy. The HOA, she argued, had a legal duty to remove them immediately before the infestation spread. She produced a document from an arborist, a document that would later be proven a forgery, and called for a vote. The board, its members spooked and pressured, voted 4-1 to authorize emergency removal the following morning at dawn. They hired a company called Quick Cut Land Management, paying a 25% surcharge for next-day service. The arborist's report was sent to the township at 4:45 p.m., just 15 minutes before the municipal offices closed. Nobody read it. The work order was approved automatically under the township's emergency tree ordinance. At 5:30, a flatbed truck carrying a Caterpillar D3 bulldozer pulled into the quick-cut yard. At 6:15, the crew received their instructions: arrive at Ridgemont Estates by 6 a.m. sharp, remove 14 mature trees, grind the stumps below grade, and haul everything away by noon. The foreman, a man named Gus, asked why the rush. He was told it was an emergency infestation. He didn't question it. The pay was good. At 9:30 that evening, Ruth's grandson Michael got a call from a neighbor, a teenager named Jake who mowed Ruth's lawn in the summers. "Hey man, I just saw a bunch of guys in orange vests marking Ruth's trees with spray paint. Like all of them. Is something happening?" Michael called his contact at the Israeli consulate. The contact called Agent Leibovitz's cell phone. Leibovitz, who was home in bed, tried to reach the Newark Field office's duty judge for an emergency injunction. But it was 10:15 on a Thursday night. The judge was unreachable. The municipal court was closed. The only authority that could physically stop the removal would be local police, and the local police had already made clear they considered this a civil matter. At 5:58 a.m., as the first pale light touched the rooftops of Ridgemont Estates, a diesel engine rumbled to life. Ruth, who always woke at dawn to water her trees before the heat of the day, heard the sound. She pulled on her cardigan, filled her watering can, and opened her front door. Gus the foreman was already in her yard. Behind him, the bulldozer's blade glinted in the morning sun. The chainsaw screamed as it bit into the first trunk, the maple for her father, Joseph. Ruth dropped the watering can. "Stop," she yelled, her voice cracking. "You can't, please you can't." Amanda Townsend stood on the sidewalk, a pink trench coat wrapped around her like a cape. She held a thermos of coffee in one hand and her phone in the other, already filming. "It's done, Ruth," she said, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "The community voted. This is for everyone's good." The maple fell first. A 60-foot trunk that had stood since 1955 crashed across the lawn, its branches shattering the small wooden sign Ruth had placed at the base. "For Joseph Friedman, born 1901, murdered 1942, Treblinka." The chainsaw crew moved to the next tree. "The elm for Chunna." Then the birch for David. Neighbors poured onto their porches. Some shouted, some cried. One woman, Mrs. Patterson, from 2 doors down, threw her slippers on and ran barefoot across the wet grass, waving her arms at the bulldozer operator. "Stop, stop. This is a memorial. You're destroying a memorial." Gus, the foreman, stepped in front of her. "Ma'am, we have a legal work order. Please step back." He held up the arborist's signed removal permit, that forgery Amanda had commissioned for $500. Ruth didn't scream. She didn't cry. She stood perfectly still, as if the decades had collapsed, and she was once again a 12-year-old girl watching men in uniforms destroy everything she loved. Her grandson Michael arrived 8 minutes later, having driven 90 miles an hour from his apartment. He found his grandmother standing among the fallen trees, her watering can still clutched in her hand, water dripping onto the shattered wood like tears. "Grandma, don't look," Michael said, trying to turn her away. "I looked at worse," she whispered. "I looked at chimneys. The last tree fell at 7:22 am, 14 stumps. Not a single trunk remained standing." Amanda lowered her phone, satisfied. She'd filmed the whole thing, planning to post it in the community Facebook group as proof that the board was serious about compliance. She didn't post it, because what she didn't know was that someone else had been filming from across the street. Jake, the teenager who mowed Ruth's lawn, he'd started recording the moment he heard the chainsaw, and he'd already uploaded the entire scene to Instagram with the caption, "They're bulldozing a Holocaust survivors memorial garden. Ruth is 91. The lady in pink is our HOA president." Within 20 minutes, the video had 3,000 views. Within an hour, it had 300,000. By the time Amanda sat down for her second cup of coffee, Jake's video was trending on Twitter under the hashtag Ruth's Garden. The Bergen County local news desk caught it first, then New York, then CNN. The images that went viral were almost too painful to process. An elderly woman standing in a field of fresh stumps, her forearm tattoo visible, and a woman in a pink coat walking away. Agent Leibovitz learned about the removal when his phone buzzed at 7:40 am. It was Vasquez. "They did it," she said. "They cut them down, all 14, right after we told them to stop." Leibovitz was silent for exactly 4 seconds. Then he said, "That's obstruction. That's willful disregard of a federal order. Get the arrest warrant." The FBI descended on Ridgemont Estates by 9 am this time. It wasn't a quiet visit. 3 black SUVs blocked the cul-de-sac. Agents in tactical jackets spread out across the property. Amanda, watching from her window, called her lawyer. Her lawyer, a man named Brian Keystone, who specialized in HOA disputes and had never handled a federal case in his life, told her to stay calm, don't answer questions, and under no circumstances leave her house. Amanda didn't listen. She walked outside, pink coat still on, and demanded to know what was happening. Leibovitz met her on the sidewalk. "Amanda Townsend, you are being placed under arrest for conspiracy to violate federal hate crime statutes, obstruction of a federal investigation, and fraud in connection with a forged arborist's report." He read her rights as Vasquez applied the cuffs. Amanda's face had gone the color of spoiled milk. "This is absurd," she kept repeating. "This is an HOA matter. I have a work order. It's an HOA matter." But by that point, it wasn't just an HOA matter. It hadn't been for days. Because Agent Vasquez had spent the previous night pulling the financial records of Sterling Properties, the developer behind the proposed rezoning. What she uncovered was a spiderweb of shell companies, illicit campaign contributions, and a paper trail that connected Amanda Townsend directly to $200,000 in consulting fees paid by Sterling to an LLC registered in her sister's name. The payments began 6 months before the first violation letter was sent to Ruth. The conspiracy wasn't just aesthetic, it was financial. Amanda was being paid to clear the block, and Ruth's memorial garden was the last obstacle. But here's where the case took a turn that even the FBI didn't expect. Because when the State of Israel learned that the trees had actually been destroyed, the response was not diplomatic. It was furious. The Israeli foreign minister issued a public statement calling the destruction a desecration of Holocaust memory on American soil. The U.S. State Department, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. The ambassador to Israel was summoned for an explanation. Within 48 hours, a special envoy from Jerusalem landed at Newark Liberty International Airport with a mandate to witness Ruth's case in person and to ensure that the full weight of international law was brought to bear. They carried a binder containing the bilateral preservation agreement between the US and Israel, highlighting Article 4, which specifically protected recognized survivor memorials from degradation, alteration, or removal by any public or private entity. Ruth's Garden, designated a living testimony site by Yad Vashem, fell squarely under that protection. Amanda's lawyer, Keystone, tried to mount a defense. He argued that Amanda was merely enforcing community covenants, that she had no knowledge of the garden's significance, that the Star of David pattern was invisible from ground level and could only be identified via satellite imagery, something no reasonable HOA president would have access to. That argument collapsed in 24 hours, because Michael's legal team, now augmented by a pro bono attorney from the Anti-Defamation League, subpoenaed Amanda's search history and email metadata. They found a search query dated September 11th, 6 months before the first violation letter, satellite view of Ridgemont Estate's Star of David trees. Amanda had known, she had looked it up, she had seen the pattern from above, recognized it for what it was, and proceeded anyway. The hate crime charge suddenly had a smoking gun. Intent, which is notoriously difficult to prove in these cases, was documented in a Google search bar. Meanwhile, Ruth's story was spreading in ways no one anticipated. Survivor organizations in Poland, Israel, Germany, and Argentina released joint statements of solidarity. The Auschwitz-Birkenau Memorial and Museum posted a photo of Ruth's garden before the destruction on its official Instagram account, alongside the words, "She planted trees so the world would remember. Today, the world must remember this." A fundraiser launched by a Jewish student group at Columbia raised $400,000 in 2 days to replant the memorial. The governor of New Jersey issued a proclamation honoring Ruth Friedman and condemning the HOA. Even the White House press secretary was asked about it at the daily briefing. "The president has been briefed," she said. "We are monitoring the situation closely, and we stand with victims of hate wherever they are." But what truly broke the case wide open wasn't the politics. It was a man named Gus Morrison, the foreman from Quick Cut Land Management. He'd been the one operating the bulldozer that morning. He'd listened to Amanda's instructions, followed the forged work order, and cut down 14 trees without thinking twice. But later that day, he saw the news. He saw Ruth's face. He saw the tattoo on her arm. And he realized, with a sickening lurch, that he'd been a cog in something monstrous. Gus walked into the FBI field office in Newark at 7 p.m. that evening, unannounced, carrying a manila envelope. He told the duty agent he had evidence. Inside the envelope was a printout of a text message thread between Amanda Townsend and the owner of Quick Cut, a man named Saul, dated the night before the removal. Amanda had written, "Change of plans. The feds might show up. If anyone asks, you're just there for emergency tree work, emerald ash borer thing. Don't talk to the old lady, don't say a word, 6 a.m. sharp, double the usual rate for quick and quiet." Saul had replied, "Feds, what am I getting into?" Amanda's response, "Nothing that can't be handled, just get it done before anyone wakes up." The text proved that Amanda knew about the federal investigation before the removal. It proved she coordinated an early morning operation specifically to circumvent potential interference. It was conspiracy, obstruction, and willful defiance of a federal agent's instructions, all captured in a series of blue and green bubbles on a screen. Gus provided the texts, his log of the call times, and the forged arborist's report with Amanda's signature on the payment authorization. In exchange, he was granted immunity for his testimony. The FBI arrested Amanda's co-conspirators within the week. Saul, the owner of Quick Cut, was charged with conspiracy to commit fraud. The arborist who falsified the report had his license suspended and faced 3 felony counts. 3 of the 4 HOA board members who voted for the emergency removal were subpoenaed. 2 of them, including Margaret Chen, the one who had already leaked documents, agreed to cooperate. They told the grand jury that Amanda had threatened their positions on the board, told them the town would sue if the trees weren't removed, and presented the arborist's report as fact. They had been manipulated, but they had also failed to do their own due diligence, and failure, the prosecutors noted, is not innocence. The only board member who had voted against the removal, a man named Harold Kim, provided the most damning testimony of all. He recalled that during the emergency vote, Amanda had told the board she'd spoken with the FBI and that the agents agreed the trees were a safety issue. Harold had recorded the meeting on his phone, a habit he'd developed after a previous dispute with Amanda over fence heights. The recording was clear, Amanda's voice, "I spoke with the federal agents, they're fine with the removal, they said it's an HOA matter, we're in the clear." That was a direct lie about federal law enforcement, a felony in itself. By the end of the month, Amanda Townsend was facing 37 counts, including conspiracy to violate civil rights, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, forgery, and making false statements to federal agents. Her lawyer withdrew from the case, citing irreconcilable differences. Her assets were frozen. Her white Mercedes was repossessed. Her Pomeranian was taken in by a neighbor. But the case still had one final, explosive twist. Because when the FBI executed a search warrant on Amanda's house, they found something in her home office that elevated the entire matter to a level no one expected. In a locked file drawer, alongside the fraudulent arborist reports and the consulting invoices from Sterling Properties, was a printed email. It was from a contact in the State Department's liaison office, someone Amanda had gone to college with. The email read, in part, "I've flagged the property situation internally. The bilateral agreement is unlikely to be invoked for a garden. You should be fine. Move before it becomes a larger issue." The email was dated 4 days before the tree removal. Amanda had a source in the U.S. government who had told her to move fast. The source was now under investigation for collusion and obstruction. The case had grown from an HOA dispute to a federal hate crime to a potential State Department scandal. The international press was camped outside the Bergen County Courthouse. Satellite trucks from Al Jazeera, the BBC, and Israeli television lined the streets. Ruth Friedman, a 91-year-old woman who just wanted to water her trees, had become the center of a diplomatic firestorm. Through it all, Ruth remained quiet. She gave one interview to a local public radio station. The host asked what she wanted to happen to Amanda. Ruth paused, then said, "I want her to plant trees, 14 trees, with her own hands, and I want her to know each of their names." The statement was printed in newspapers across the world. It was a more devastating verdict than any courtroom could deliver, because Ruth had just offered Amanda the one thing Amanda had never offered her, grace, wrapped in memory. But the legal system wasn't in the business of grace. The trial date was set, and the evidence was overwhelming. Amanda's only hope was a plea deal, but the prosecutors, facing enormous public pressure and the glare of international scrutiny, were not inclined to be generous. They were offering 15 years in federal prison. Amanda's new lawyer, a white-collar specialist from Manhattan, was scrambling to find any leverage. That leverage would come from an unexpected direction, because what nobody had yet realized was that the bulldozer itself carried a secret that would change everything. Gus Morrison, in his rush that morning, had forgotten to disable the dashboard camera on his Caterpillar D3. The camera had been rolling for the entire operation. It captured every tree falling, every word Amanda shouted, every interaction between the crew and the neighbors. And more importantly, it captured a conversation that occurred off to the side, away from the other cameras, between Amanda and a man in a dark suit who had arrived just as the trees were coming down. A man no one else had noticed. A man whose face was clearly visible on that dashboard footage. When the FBI finally reviewed the dashboard footage from Gus Morrison's bulldozer, they noticed what no one else had seen that morning. At 7:04 a.m., while the chainsaws were still screaming and Ruth stood frozen on her porch, a black sedan with diplomatic plates pulled up at the far end of the cul-de-sac. A man in a dark suit stepped out, walked casually past the crowd of neighbors, and approached Amanda Townsend. They spoke for exactly 3 minutes, their faces half illuminated by the flashing lights of the quick-cut trucks. Then the man got back in his car and drove away. Gus's camera captured the entire exchange, including the license plate. The plate was registered to the United States Department of State. The man's face, run through the Bureau's facial recognition system, returned a match in under an hour. He was a deputy assistant secretary in the Bureau of Near Eastern Affairs, a career diplomat named David Latham. The same David Latham who had attended Georgetown with Amanda Townsend 30 years earlier. The same David Latham whose email, found in Amanda's locked file drawer, had advised her to move quickly before the bilateral preservation agreement could be invoked. He hadn't just sent an email, he had come to watch. The footage showed Latham shaking Amanda's hand, then leaning in to say something that the onboard microphone picked up with eerie clarity. "You did it. The ambassador is already on a plane. This is going to be a media mess, but the legal exposure is minimal if you stick to the infestation story. Delete the texts. Deny everything." Amanda had nodded, and Latham had left, but she hadn't deleted the texts. And now the texts, the email, and the video formed an unbroken chain of evidence, linking a State Department official to a conspiracy to destroy a Holocaust memorial. The FBI arrested Latham at his office in Foggy Bottom on a Tuesday morning, in full view of his colleagues. He was charged with conspiracy to violate civil rights, obstruction of justice, and misuse of classified diplomatic channels. His security clearance was revoked within hours. The State Department, already reeling from the international fallout, issued a terse statement pledging full cooperation. Behind closed doors, the Secretary of State called the Israeli ambassador personally to apologize. Amanda Townsend's trial began in federal district court in Newark, 11 months after the trees fell. The prosecution painted a picture of greed and calculated cruelty. They showed the jury Ruth's tattoo, the photographs of her family, the Yad Vashem certification that designated her garden a living testimony site. They played the recording of the emergency board meeting where Amanda lied about the FBI's approval. They displayed the satellite imagery search query, the forged arborist's report, the texts to Saul at QuickCut, and the video of Latham congratulating her. Gus Morrison testified about the pressure he'd received. Margaret Chen and Harold Kim testified about the manipulation. And finally, Ruth herself took the stand. She walked slowly to the witness box, leaning on a cane, her grandson Michael at her side until the bailiff instructed him to sit. She wore the same cardigan she had worn that morning, a detail the jury did not miss. The prosecutor asked her to describe the day the trees were cut. She spoke for 20 minutes, her voice steady but her eyes wet. She named each tree, each family member, and what they had meant to her. When she finished, the courtroom was silent. One juror was openly weeping. Amanda's defense, led by her new attorney, argued that she was overzealous but not criminal, that she had believed the infestation report was legitimate, and that her search for the Star of David pattern had been innocent curiosity. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. They returned with guilty verdicts on all 37 counts. The sentencing hearing was held on a gray morning in November. Judge Alan Morrison, no relation to Gus, spoke for 15 minutes before delivering the sentence. He described Amanda's actions as a premeditated campaign of cruelty against a woman whose life had already endured more sorrow than any human being should bear. He noted that the crime was not merely a property dispute, but an assault on memory itself. "You knew what those trees meant," he said, looking directly at Amanda, "and you cut them down anyway. That is not enforcement, that is desecration." Amanda Townsend was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. David Latham received 7. Saul, the owner of QuickCut, received 18 months. The arborist who forged the report received 2 years. Sterling Properties was fined $12 million and permanently barred from operating in New Jersey. The state legislature, in a special session, passed a bill known as Ruth's Law, which prohibited homeowners associations from removing memorial plantings designated by recognized historical or cultural institutions. But the verdict that mattered most was delivered by Ruth herself, 2 weeks after the sentencing, when Amanda's attorney requested a meeting to discuss a possible apology. Ruth agreed. She met Amanda in a small conference room at the detention center, accompanied only by Michael and a prison guard. Amanda, in an orange jumpsuit, read from a prepared statement. She said she was sorry that she had let greed cloud her judgment, that she had never intended to cause such pain. When she finished, Ruth sat quietly for a long moment. Then she said, "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I have carried hate before and it is heavier than any tree." Then she slid a small envelope across the table. Inside were 14 seeds, each one labeled with the name of a family member. Elm for Chunna, maple for Joseph, birch for David, and so on through all 14. "When you get out," Ruth said, "you will plant these, you will water them, you will watch them grow, and you will tell your children what you did and what you learned." Amanda did not reply. She was crying too hard to speak. The community replanted the memorial garden on the one-year anniversary of the destruction. More than 300 people came. The governor attended. The Israeli ambassador, the same one who had been summoned to Washington in anger a year earlier, stood beside Ruth and helped her lower the first sapling into the ground. A cutting from the Anne Frank tree in Amsterdam, donated by the Anne Frank House Museum, was planted at the garden's center. Students from the local elementary school read the names of the 14 family members aloud, one by one, while a rabbi recited the Kaddish. The new trees were protected by a conservation easement held jointly by the township and Yad Vashem, ensuring that no HOA, no developer, and no future Amanda could ever touch them again. The Ridgemont Estates HOA was dissolved by a vote of its remaining members, replaced by a neighborhood association with no enforcement powers beyond organizing block parties and maintaining the community mailbox. Amanda's house, seized as part of her asset forfeiture, was sold at auction. The proceeds funded a permanent endowment for the garden's maintenance. And then there was the surprise. A week after the replanting, a letter arrived at Ruth's house from Poland. It was written in Polish, translated by a cousin, and came from a small village near Krakow. A local historian had seen Ruth's story in the international news and had spent months combing through parish records, deportation lists, and refugee testimonies. The letter contained a photograph Ruth had never seen before, a group of children standing in front of a synagogue in 1938. Among them was a boy of about 10, with dark eyes and a serious expression. On the back, someone had written his name in pencil. It was Ruth's brother David, the one for whom she had planted the birch. The historian had found it in an archive in Warsaw, buried in a box of photographs confiscated by the Gestapo and never claimed. Ruth held the photograph to her chest and wept. "I had forgotten his face," she said. "For 80 years, I could not remember his face, and now he is here." The photograph was framed and hung in Ruth's living room, next to the certificate from Yad Vashem and a small plastic bag containing soil from the original garden, soil that had been scooped up by Jake the teenager while the bulldozers were still warm, as a gift to his neighbor. Ruth planted that soil beneath the new birch sapling. "Now he is home," she said. "They are all home." And that is how a 91-year-old woman, a watering can, and 14 trees became the center of an international reckoning over memory, justice, and the quiet refusal to let the world forget. But the story doesn't end here. Because what happened in the years after, what grew from those new trees, and what Ruth did with the platform the world handed her, is a chapter that might just restore your faith in what one person can do when they refuse to look away. But before we get there, there's one more piece of this story you need to understand. That piece is what happened when Ruth's story reached the one place she never expected, a classroom in Hamburg, Germany. A history teacher named Klaus Fischer showed his students the footage of the trees falling and the photograph of David, newly found. One of his students, a 17-year-old girl named Lena, went home and asked her grandfather what he did during the war. He had never spoken about it. That night, for the first time in 60 years, he told his family the truth. He had been a guard at Treblinka. He had spent his whole life hiding it. And because an old woman planted a birch tree in New Jersey, a family in Germany finally confronted the past. That is the power of a single act of memory. It travels further than you will ever know. Ruth passed away 2 years after the garden was replanted. She was 93. On her grave, they placed not a headstone but a sapling, a descendant of the Anne Frank tree, with a simple plaque. She planted what they tried to burn. So the question I leave you with is not just about HOAs or property rights. It's about what you would be willing to stand for and what you are willing to document. Because the only reason Ruth's story became a movement, the only reason the truth reached Hamburg and broke a family's silence, is that people kept receipts. Amanda's texts, the satellite search, Gus's dashboard camera, the neighbor's phone, Harold's secret recording, all of it mattered. None of it was planned. It was just ordinary people who refused to look away. If this story made you feel something, if it reminded you that memory is a weapon and that sometimes the smallest garden can shake the biggest institutions, then do this for me. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because I tell stories about the people who fight back when the system says they can't. And drop a comment below. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to defend something that mattered, something no one else saw the value in? I want to hear your story. Every comment is a receipt, and every receipt is a seed. Next week, a town council tried to shut down a foster home by redefining it as a public nuisance. So the foster mom found a 19th century deed that made the whole city hall her property. You'll want to see how that ended. Until then, keep your receipts, all of them.